Welcome back, everyone, to Meditations by Gregory T. Obert, bringing you the best in guided meditations and mental health discussions every week. I'm your host, clinical psychologist, Dr. Gregory T. Obert. Thank you so much for joining me today. And this week's episode is going to be a continuation of the Therapy 101 series. That's right, I realized that amongst all the things that I have talked about, I haven't talked about something that I also have some expertise in, which is substance use. Yes, one of those classic, unfortunate, kind of co-occurring disorders that can really complicate all sorts of treatment. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about what it is, how it develops, why people continue to use, and what can be done about it for those that are, in fact, interested in changing their lives. Before we jump into it, I just want to throw out there, if you enjoy what I do here, please consider leaving a 5-star rating and review, and do more than consider, please leave a 5-star rating and review wherever you are listening to this show. It really helps the show grow. Please share the episodes if you find them useful, and of course, if you want to support what I do, head on over to royaloasispi.com. Take a look at the store, consider picking up, and do more than consider, pick up a few of the premium meditations that are up there for purchase. And if you really want to get to work, definitely send me a message to my website and we can start personalized individual psychotherapy. So without further ado, let's jump into it. So I want to start by sharing a story that I have not told publicly before, but it was one that I think really highlights just how damaging substance use can be. So back in 2014, 2015, I worked for a community mental health agency in Chicago. And while I was there, it was just one of the most difficult jobs I ever had. I learned a lot about severe mental illness, and I also learned a lot about burnout. I started out on a team where people were of sort of moderate levels of functioning, and due to some downsizing, rearranging, and in my opinion, some unethical behavior going on, I ended up on the severe mental illness team. The treatment model for this team is called Assertive Community Treatment, or the ACT team. And we were very, very loosely following that treatment model. So here I was on this team where I was originally on the moderate functioning team. I was part of, I think, 5 or 6, and we had maybe between all of us about 80 clients to kind of divvy up and check in on over the course of the week. And then when I found myself on this ACT team, they made it a super ACT team. So there were maybe 20 to 30 therapists and hundreds of clients that we just had to try and figure out ways to divvy up amongst everybody. And quite frankly, it was not a good situation. But I'm not here to talk about the structure of the company. I'm here to talk about one particular client who started out on that moderate functioning team. I had met him a few times over the course of my brief stint on that team, and he was perfectly pleasant when I met with him, though it was clear that something was going on. Maybe he was high. That's really what I tended to think. And when he transitioned along with me and the rest of my team over to ACT, things just started to get a little bit worse for him. So while he said, yes, I definitely am staying off drugs and I'm doing good, he did have severe mental illness diagnoses on his chart. And, severe mental illness mixed with substance use doesn't tend to go all that well together. When I met with him rarely on that team, he was somebody who, I guess, seemed to just be getting a little bit worse. He was still polite to me, but just kind of spacey, thousand-yard stare, just not particularly with it as much as he was on the moderate functioning team. Well, one day, he shows up to the agency and demands to see me. Now, I was not his primary therapist. I just knew of him. I believe I was his secondary. And he was apparently quite agitated, very angry, yelling at the clerks up front. And I think, if I recall correctly, he had left and he came back because someone threatened to call an ambulance or the police or something. And then he came back and he demanded to see me. Well, I decided to see him in a treatment room, but I did not do so alone. And when we met, he was laser focused on me, not his primary therapist. His primary therapist was a big dude. I mean, he would definitely be able to spring into action if something happened. But this client was laser focused on me, ranting and raving that I had slept with his sister or cousin. I think it was his sister, if I remember correctly. And I have no idea what he was talking about. I don't know. I didn't even know that you had a sister. I definitely would not have gone on a date with anybody related to you, because that would have just been a complete and total, not only violation of ethics, but also just sticky situation. And he was just swearing up and down, no, 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 you absolutely did this, you absolutely did this, and how dare you? And so his primary therapist, of course, was trying to step in, calm him down. I texted my supervisor, you're going to need to call the ambulance because this dude is escalated. I don't know if we're talking the severe mental illness, potentially a manic episode, a psychotic episode, but he's gone. He's gone. Well, just as I sent that text, it was like he sensed it, and he got up and he walked out. So, of course, the ambulance, the police showed up. He wasn't there. Later in the day, once they left, he showed back up to start yelling at somebody. They called the police and the ambulance again, and he disappeared. Well, of course, at this point, it's our duty and responsibility to check on his general welfare. So I went with my supervisor because he didn't want to deal with his primary therapist. He only wanted to deal with me. And I went with my supervisor, and we ended up going to his apartment. We had the police and the ambulance outside of his apartment, and he refused to come out until he would speak with me. So this was a dangerous situation that I could have found myself in, and naively, I did end up going into the house, though I was on guard, and he was just sobbing. He looked like he had been crying all afternoon. He looked so depressed, and he said, I'm so sorry for my behavior, but my grandmother passed away today. And of course, my heart went out to him. I felt so bad for him, and totally understand now why you were acting the way that you were. The reality is, though, that we're very concerned about how you've been acting, and we really want you to get some help. So would you be willing to just go to the hospital? We have the police outside. We have the ambulance. We'd really like you to stay at the hospital for a little bit. And he ultimately agreed to it, and I think he had a neighbor or someone take care of his cat. So, of course, that was a Friday, if I remember correctly, and it was just like, wow, thinking about this all weekend. And then in the next week or so, I went with his primary therapist to go visit him in the hospital, just completely kind of flat. And I asked him, how things were going with his grandma, and he said, what do you mean? I'm like, you told me that your grandma died. No, I don't know what you're talking about. Just completely and totally had no clue what I was going on about. And of course, while he was there, it was determined that there was some substance use going on. Though I don't quite remember what, it was very clear that whatever he was using, he had some kind of bad trip, so much so that he thought I was sleeping with his sister and that his grandmother had died. What just a devastating story for this man. And the way the story ends, I honestly don't know whatever happened to him, because for the remainder of my time on that team, he was bounced from there to a more long-term institutionalized facility. And I remember the very last day, I called him to let him know that I was leaving, and it was just like, okay, well, see ya. So I have no idea what happened to him. I hope he ended up getting the help that he needed. But I tell this long story to show how substance use is just devastating for people. And I don't want to sit here and have you think, okay, but substance use, that means anytime anybody uses a substance? No, I don't mean that. Of course, there are substances, legal and illegal, that people use recreationally. And believe it or not, sometimes some people can use those recreationally and there are no problems with them. I remember being in grad school and one of my professors told me that his client, because he had a private practice, one of his clients would once a year come into town and he would just do meth recreationally once a year. You don't typically think about someone recreationally doing methamphetamines, but in this case, I guess it was true, or at least that's the story that was told. So certainly, substance use can be casual in nature. Of course, everyone goes out to bars, right? And we have wine tastings and whatnot. That does not mean that you have a problem. What we're really talking about today, when I use substance use, and I may use the terms interchangeably, what we're really talking about is substance use disorder, or SUD, or SUD. And this is a problematic pattern involving alcohol, drugs, or prescription meds. And you may know somebody out there who is struggling with these particular issues. Heck, you may even be that particular person. And the reason why I think it's so important to talk about this stuff is not only does it help reduce the stigma around substance use, but additionally, it allows people to understand how they got to where they are at and what their options are moving forward. So let's dive into it. And to start, we're going to talk a little bit about how and why substance use starts. So, of course, there are multiple factors at play, and typically the three common ones are going to be biological, psychological, and environmental. So when we think about biological components that influence substance use, this is exactly what you tend to think, which is genetics. You might think brain chemistry. For example, dopamine pathways might make initial use of a substance more rewarding. The genetic component, it depends on the substance. There's many studies out there, but of course, in general, the quick Google search, family history tends to increase risk of substance use generally by about 40 to 60%. And we know this. We have perfect examples of this throughout history. In fact, if I want to talk about groups, one of the things that has plagued American Indians, for example, is a lot of alcoholism. Now, some people suspect that it might be due to a genetic component, that there just was not alcohol in their communities for, well, most of human history before settlers came over, and then they were exposed to it, and of course it's affected them in many ways that it wouldn't affect, say, someone like the Irish, where, alcohol use is a lot more common in a culture like that. Could be something simple like that. It could just be social and environmental factors. So it could be peer pressure. Maybe there's cultural norms around how people drink. And by the way, I'm talking more than just American Indians and the Irish at this point. Talking any culture that you're in. There might be some norms around how much to drink, when to drink. I mean, think about college. If we think about cultural norms in college, people are drinking before 21, and they're probably drinking quite a bit. In fact, there's a lot of alcoholism that's normalized when people are in college. I remember just the kind of the names people would give for the different days of the week. I don't remember all of them, but I do remember Wednesdays was Wasted Wednesdays, and Thursdays was Thirsty Thursdays, and then, of course, Fridays and Saturdays, and, maybe a little bit on Sundays with a brunch or something. So, and there were names for other days of the week as well. So maybe there is that cultural norm to just drink. Talk about accessibility as well. Thinking about where and when to get a substance. I bring up alcohol, not because I want to focus just on alcohol, but alcohol is the most easily accessible substance in America. And of course, if it's easily accessible, people are going to use it. Now, that's been changing a bit with the laws, though still federally illegal at the time of recording. Marijuana is legal in many states, so of course there's going to be more people using marijuana. Cocaine, heroin, not so easy to get. But if you're in the right area, you know the right people, guess what? You're going to be able to get those substances and use quite easily. There might also be some experimentation when people are teenagers and their adolescents or even young adulthood. Hey, I've heard about this. I kind of want to try it, see what it's all about. So even that particular dynamic of I just want to try and see, that can get people started on regular substance use of any kind. And of course, lastly, there is the psychological component to why and how people start to use. So first off, simple but powerful, stress. If I'm feeling pretty stressed, like I can't handle my life, of course I might want something to take the edge off. That's also true with other mental health disorders like anxiety or depression. I'm just not doing well and I want to feel something, maybe feel alive a little bit. So yeah, temporary boost to my mood if I drink or if I, get high, whatever the case may be. And then, of course, the big one, which is a huge comorbidity with substance use disorders, and that is trauma. So PTSD or other types of traumatic disorders. Substance use goes hand in hand with it, and of course, it's almost like they're dating. Because when you think about a trauma disorder like post-traumatic stress disorder, you are thinking about somebody experiencing a major trauma. And the way to kind of summarize this is sudden, unexpected violence. And this type of incident can be sexual in nature. It might not be. It might be gore. It might be learning about someone close to you dying suddenly in a horrific way. Whatever the case may be, if you want to learn more about this, you can check out my Therapy 101 episode on trauma specifically. It's about an hour of me going in depth around trauma. Regardless, all of these types of psychological conditions are going to influence people into using substance use. It's not guaranteed. It doesn't mean whether the biological, the psychological, or the environmental pieces that I mentioned, it's not guaranteed that these are going to make you use. It just means that they're going to influence you. And of course, the more what we call risk factors or triggers are at play, the more likely it is that someone will start to pick up and use. And that is then, of course, more likely to turn into a substance use disorder. And you have to even think, too, about some common entry points, where and why people tend to start. Sometimes it is just that recreational use escalating, trying to rekindle that first high, and sometimes it's self-medication. Sometimes it's prescriptions that unfortunately lead to dependency. Opioids, the opioid crisis, is one such condition where being prescribed opioids is a big deal because you don't want people to become addicted to that pain medication. So, of course, we start to think, well, these substances might be coping mechanisms and they help me feel good. And what's wrong with that, Greg? Of course they feel good. I agree. Of course they feel good. But unfortunately, this can lead to spiraling without intent. And this is where the cycle is just a nasty cycle that people get into. I think they call it the cycle of abuse, although I typically hear that more so with like domestic violence. I've heard it with substance use rarely. Really, I've heard probably a more common term is the addiction loop. So, three big pieces here that keep people stuck and reinforcing substance use. So first off is going to be tolerance. And I don't mean, okay, well, you live your life, I'll live mine. I mean the need for more of that substance to get the same effect. So, as an example, if you are someone who's had alcohol, the first time you had, say, 3 or 4 drinks, and it was your very first time ever drinking, you are probably very tipsy, maybe drunk, probably not blackout, but maybe. I mean, I guess it could happen. Now, let's say you have 3 or 4 drinks multiple times a week for a month, 2 months, 5 months, 10 months. After a while, that 3 to 4 drinks is not going to be enough to give you that effect of being drunk or tipsy. You're going to need to start drinking more because your body is building up that tolerance. So I need to use more to get the same effect. And of course, that is absolutely going to cause problems, which of course is going to lead to one of those problems being dependence, that physical or psychological reliance on these substances. So people don't tend to think about it, but alcohol is very physiologically addictive. People tend to think about harder drugs being more physiological addictive, like heroin or meth. And while those certainly are physiologically addictive, so is alcohol. Regardless of the substance of choice, it is likely that the body is going to need some of that drug in order to function in some way. The body's just going to crave it. And even if there's no physiological addiction, there's sometimes a psychological addiction. No, I need to have this because I'm not going to be okay if I don't have this. I've heard people go back and forth, for example, on marijuana, if it's physiologically addictive, if it's psychologically addictive. I'll let the people who are a little bit more familiar with the genetic side of marijuana throw their hat in the ring on that. What I will say is, in my experience, people do tend to be psychologically reliant on such a drug because marijuana helps mellow me out and I need it, and if I don't have it, I'm just not going to be able to function okay. Well, yeah. What's the quote by Henry Ford? Whether you like him or not, this is a great quote. Whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. And that's that physiological reliance and dependence that's coming into play. And finally, the last piece of this addiction loop is the withdrawal symptoms. And of course, the withdrawal symptoms mean that when you deprive yourself of that substance, you are going to be experiencing some kind of physiological negative effect. So, classic example, if you are someone who uses nicotine regularly, cigarettes, and you stop smoking, what's that like? You start to get agitated, irritated. You might have some problems sleeping. You're going to probably be jittery. And of course, that's just cigarettes. Now imagine if it's meth. And sometimes the withdrawal symptoms are actually so dangerous that they could kill you. This is why I will often hear people say, man, I went to the hospital and I got a prescription for beer. Wasn't that funny? They keep beer at the hospital? Well, yeah, because if you go and you had too much to drink or you're physiologically addicted to alcohol and they just stop you cold turkey, you could die. So, of course, they need to have some kind of alcohol in there to help wean you off. And the same is true for other sorts of substances as well. They might need to prescribe something to help wean you off. Now, what are some of the psychological factors that also keep substance use going? I did talk a little bit about psychological reliance, but there's more to it than that. You can also think about cravings. So this is where my expertise comes in because I did substance use disorder treatment for a while. And cravings, urges, I use them interchangeably. Some people prefer to split them up. Like the craving is the mental, like the thought, and then the urge is the actual physical drive to go get the thing. I mean, if that helps you, by all means, go ahead. I use cravings and urges interchangeably. But think about how cravings can be triggered by anything. If I go to a certain place, so let's say I like to, drink a fifth in my car at McDonald's. Well, every time I see the golden arches, well, that's going to trigger me to want to drink. Maybe it's certain people. Maybe it's certain thoughts that pop up. Like, I could quit any time. I'm just going to have one. I know I can stop after one. Or maybe even co-occurring disorders, again, like PTSD. I feel terrible because I'm thinking about this awful trauma that's happened to me. I need something to help me forget. There could also be some social and environmental factors that keep substance use going. For example, enabling relationships. Sometimes people are in a relationship, could be a family member, could be a friend, could be a romantic relationship where somebody is using and they want you to use with them. So, of course, in order to keep that relationship solid, they are going to, the non-using person may just start using because they want to enjoy the other person's company. Kind of a classic example of this for those that have watched Breaking Bad would be Jesse and his girlfriend in, I think it was season 2. I can't quite remember her name. It was the actress that played Jessica Jones. I don't remember her name. I'm sorry if somehow you're listening to this. But you were great in Breaking Bad. And so, of course, even though he didn't necessarily want to start using, he wanted her company. And that led to addiction. There could be lack of support systems. Maybe I just don't have anybody in my life, but I do have this substance, so I might as well use it to feel better. Could be stressed, maybe poverty, job loss. Heck, maybe even cultural acceptance, right? Like I mentioned with college, those binge drinking norms. So these particular social and environmental factors can maintain people's substance use disorders. And finally, of course, there's the physiological, really the neurological component, which is the brain science. Now, I am not as much of an expert on the brain science. I'm not a neuropsychologist. What I can say is that the brain is very plastic. And what I mean by that isn't that it's made of some hard disposable material. It means it is flexible and adaptive. So it can be molded, and it is molded many ways throughout our lifetimes. When we learn things, new neurons light up, new mental pathways light up. Pathways that are not being used as much get trimmed just to keep the brain as efficient as possible. So when we think about how a substance affects the body, it's going to affect the brain in a lot of different ways. Because, of course, the mind, the brain, and the body are connected. They're one in the same. If I drink a lot, it's going to affect my judgment, how I see, my ability to inhibit my thoughts. I'm just going to speak quickly and probably very bluntly. If I'm doing cocaine, I'm going to have that rush, especially if it's powder. It goes right up the nose, and it's getting real close to the brain there, and it's going to activate that whole reward system in the brain, and it's going to rewire things up there. So, of course, it can feel like it's impossible to quit with those brain changes occurring. Now, regardless, whether it's psychological, social, environmental, physiological components that maintain substance use, how do these, whether it's one or multiple, impact people in their daily lives? So, of course, it's going to impact people in multiple ways. First off, and maybe most obviously, is the physical health effects. So, of course, you could have some short-term impaired judgment. Classic examples of this are people who drive under the influence, and it doesn't necessarily have to be alcohol, it could be any substance. Oh, it's fine, I'll be okay, it's no big deal, until it's not, right? It's no big deal until it's not. And talk to anybody who's killed or seriously injured another person while they were driving under the influence of something, and they will tell you it is not a big deal. It is something they live with for the rest of their lives, and it does not make for a good time. And of course, you can have long-term health effects, maybe liver damage from alcohol, maybe cardiovascular issues from stimulants. Of course, you risk overdose as well if you don't use within recommended limits, whatever that is for you. If that tolerance gets so high, you might accidentally overdose. Plus, maybe your dealer, if it's an illegal substance, maybe you get a bad batch. It's not like that stuff's regulated. So, yeah, it might end up being pretty nasty for you. Physically speaking, that is. But now, what about other factors like mental and emotional toll? Well, of course, this is likely to increase anxiety and depression because if I'm jonesing for my next hit of something, I'm going to get pretty nervous, pretty worried. Am I going to be able to get this? My mind might be racing until I finally get it. Heck, I might feel depressed as well because I can't stop. Not to mention, it's the way people feel when they come down from the high. You know, a lot of those emotions that were maybe held back behind the floodgates, they start coming in full force. I see this a lot in the trauma work that I do. Man, it feels okay to use because you can shove all those emotions, those thoughts down, but then once the high is over, what are you left with? You're left with you, you're left feeling worse, probably physically and mentally, and a lot of times those emotions and those thoughts come through much more sharply than they did before the substance use. Of course, cognitive decline can come from this. I remember working with a veteran very recently who just could not remember where my office was, even though where I worked was a hallway. He just could not remember. And when I consulted with the neuropsychologist on staff, he said, well, look, he's got a long history of cocaine use. And depending on how that impacted his cardiovascular system, maybe vascular portions of the brain, it just fried his brain. He used so much. And I'm sure there were other things that he used as well. This substance use can also lead to strained relationships or isolation, because who wants to be around somebody who's irritable because they want to use, or someone who's high all the time? That's very difficult for people that don't want to go to that same place. In fact, I have worked with a number of people in my career where one person in a relationship wants to use and the other person does not, or doesn't want to use as much, and it's hard for the person that doesn't want to use because they just want to, have their romantic interest with them. I'm using romantic relationships in this particular instance. It's very hard for them to watch their romantic interest just go to this high drunk place. Not maybe constantly, maybe it's very often, maybe it's daily, maybe it's multiple times a week. It's tough. It's tough. And of course that makes the person who's not using not want to be around the other individual. So the individual using is oftentimes using in isolation. Of course, there can be other ripple effects that happen when people continue to use. There can be effects on families. Sometimes there's codependency. There can be intergenerational trauma. If I'm high, if I'm drunk, I might do or say things to other people that maybe I mean, maybe I don't. But it can really impact people. Codependency. Sometimes people will rely on members of family or friends to give them money, right, or to give them substances. Heck, sometimes people find themselves in dangerous situations where you're relying on some dealer to give you substances Maybe you're doing stuff that you really don't want to do. Whether that be some kind of sex act, maybe it's some kind of criminal act, whatever the case is, but you do it because you want that substance. Of course, there can be work and school problems on top of that. And then finances. How much does it cost to use? Even if someone thinks, oh, well, it's not that bad. I just drink beer. I like the taste of beer. And I have, maybe like 2 24-packs of beer a week. And I spread that out, so it's no big deal. First off, 48 cans of beer a week is a heck of a lot of alcohol. Second off, how much money is that over the course of the year? It's probably quite a bit. And if money's already tight, well, and that doesn't even count financial issues with legal fees. Because if I get busted carrying, some marijuana or, again, some cocaine, whatever, that's going to be a problem, legally speaking. And because it's a problem legally, that means financially. And of course, society-wide. It's going to be healthcare burdens because people who use are going to need to use the healthcare system probably more often. And there's going to be crime correlations because if you're using illegal substances, heck, even if you're using legal substances to the point where it's a disorder, you're probably going to be involved in some kind of criminal activity. And it may not even be something super duper serious. I'm not saying like you're going to rob a bank, but if you get behind the car and you're drunk, the wheel of a car and you're drunk, well, that's a problem. Public intoxication, maybe someone relieving themselves on the side of a building, well, that's a problem. That's a problem. So I say all of this and it paints a negative picture, but here's the thing. Individual circumstances, of course, vary. The substances vary. And it is harder to either moderate or quit if someone's been using longer. But the good news is that it's never too late to start. Whatever that means for you. And notice how I mentioned 2 goals, because there tend to be 2 goals related to substance use. Either someone can be completely sober, and some people prefer the word abstinent. I don't know. To me, when I hear that word, I think more about sex. So I tend to just kind of stick with sobriety, whether that's alcohol or not. It could be any substance that you're sober from. Or you could have some sort of moderation. Some people are not willing to give up a substance entirely. They just want to learn to use it a little bit more responsibly. So, of course, recovery is possible in either way, in either case, and it's personalized. So from my perspective, of course, if someone wants to do some sort of psychotherapy, there are all sorts of treatments to help people with that particular goal. Probably the most common one that you will hear about is cognitive behavioral therapy for substance use disorders, so CBT-SUD. And that's something that I'm trained in, and I certainly think it is an effective treatment. It just means that if someone wants to do it because it's structured, they have to actually be ready to do it. Because it's not going to be, like a one and done thing. Heck, the treatment itself is structured to be 12 sessions. So, 3 months long. That doesn't mean that by the end of 3 months, everything's going to be magically better, but it does mean that the people who finish are going to have so many more skills to use to help them overcome their substance use disorder that it's night and day. Now, of course, if people don't want to do any kind of therapy, there's also medication-assisted treatment. So, for example, if someone wants to get off being addicted to opioids, things like methadone, buprenorphine, I think Suboxone is one of them. I don't quite remember all the different drugs and the specific reasons when someone would or wouldn't use it. But those are some. Alcohol has naltrexone, nicotine patches, for example. Probably the most famous one that everyone would be aware of is Antabuse, which is, and I pulled it up because I wanted to make sure I had the disulfiram, the correct drug word. But Antabuse, if you're not familiar, it's a pill that you take, and when you drink, you end up getting so sick that sometimes you vomit, there's nausea. It's a bad time. So if you're serious about getting better, and like I said, there's other types of drugs to help that would not cause those same symptoms. I can't remember if it's naltrexone or not for alcohol, but there's one where it just kind of takes away the joy of drinking. It doesn't really do it for people anymore. And there's no, vomiting necessary. Opioids, again, like methadone, buprenorphine, these just kind of help the body start to wean off those substances of choice. So that's an option too. Some people also prefer support groups of some sort. So the most common is going to be the 12-step program. So Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous. And, some people like these, some people don't. I will say this. Sometimes 12-step programs can get a little preachy. And some people really like that. They dig it. They want that. They crave that. Some people just don't like that. As an example, when I was in grad school part 1 at DePaul, one of my assignments in my group therapy class was to go to some sort of group. And kind of the most common option was a 12-step meeting. So I decided to do that. I went to an AA meeting, and I announced to everyone beforehand, the chair leading the meeting, I said, listen, I'm a student. I just kind of want to see what you all are about. And they said, that's fine. You can stay, no problem. And, they asked me to stand up and introduce myself during the group as well. And I did that. I said, I'm a student. I'm just here to look, to observe. And I remember at the end of the meeting, somebody coming up to me, and he clearly did not believe me. He was saying things like, it's okay to be here, and, sometimes people come and it's not even alcohol, but, it could be marijuana. It's just important to be honest to ourselves about why we're here. And it's like, no, legitimately, I'm not here because I have a substance use disorder. I'm here to observe. And so if somebody actually did have a substance use disorder and that was their first experience, someone coming up to them and questioning them or maybe preaching to them a little bit, they might be turned off by that. Some people might be okay with that. So if you are someone who's thinking about 12-step, just know if it doesn't work for you, that's okay. And if it does, fantastic. There are, of course, other groups like peer support groups, apps that you can use to track sobriety, and even more holistic options. Maybe it's practicing mindfulness, maybe it's exercise, changing your diet, or it could even be going to rehab for severe cases. And rehab, depending on the program, is not all that long. In fact, I found one that was kind of interesting. It was in Florida. I wish I could remember the name of the place, otherwise I'd give credit to it, but it still deals specifically with people who are executives of some sort. So it's hard for them to get away. If they're gone for a long period of time, that may cause suspicion. And when people in power, especially high places of power, have any kind of suspicion around them, that may cause people beneath them to lose not loyalty but faith in that individual. So this particular program was, listen, we're a 10-day program. You come out here for 10 days. It's not strange for an executive to be gone for a week and a half, essentially. And then you get right back to work. But you do everything you need to do quickly, and then you go back and you leave. Well, you leave and then you go back, I guess, in that order. So there are options out there that people can use. Now, of course, sometimes there's access to access issues for these different programs. Sometimes people just need to talk to someone right away. So like the SAMHSA hotline in the US is one that people can use to talk about substance use. Sometimes people lack the necessary insurance coverage. So if somebody wanted to participate in some sort of structured mental health program, they'd either have to do it out of pocket or they'd have to do out of network, which it's not out of pocket at the end of the day, but it is out of pocket up front. Or they might just have some trouble kind of overcoming the stigma. What does it look like if I'm someone who has to go to substance use treatment? But here's the thing. What is worse ultimately? And what is worse is a substance use disorder that is taking over your life, that is ruining your life, ruining your relationships, ruining your finances, ruining your job, ruining everything. And honestly, if you are out there and you are thinking, yeah, but it's just so hard, it's so hard, maybe this is you, I'm going to tell you what's worse. Having somebody potentially look at you funny, having to spend maybe some money out of pocket for a program or a therapist, calling a hotline to talk to someone about options, maybe going to an AA meeting just to see? Or is it worse to continue to suffer the effects of a substance use disorder? To me, that's an easy choice. Maybe it's not so easy for you. Every situation is different. I get that. Just some food for thought. Now, even with this said, sometimes people do think that it's kind of pointless because, hey, Greg, I tried. I tried before. It didn't work. I relapsed. Guess what? That's okay. I mean, okay in that I know it doesn't feel okay because the person trying to work through their substance use disorder didn't actually accomplish their goal. But relapse is part of the process. That's the whole point of aftercare, long-term strategies like healthy habits. I mean, we don't even need to think about substance use disorders to see this at play. Let's say somebody wants to lose 50 pounds. If they start a diet, are they going to stick to it perfectly every single day? Probably not. There's probably going to be moments where they sneak a cookie or some ice cream or something. But overall, by the end of the diet, they still accomplished their goal, even if along the way they didn't do it perfectly. And that's just a diet with cookies and ice cream. That's not talking about something more severe like a substance that you're trying to get yourself off. So relapse is part of the process. In fact, it's expected. Very rarely does somebody just stop a substance and that's it, they're done. It happens, and to those people, I tip my hat to them. For most, there is going to be relapse, and it's okay. People that relapse have not failed. They are not worthless. It just means they need to regroup, refocus, think about how that relapse occurred, and then figure out a way to prevent it or avoid it in the future. And I think that's kind of what tends to make 12-step maybe difficult for some people. People will talk about, I've been sober for this long, and for some people we're talking 20, 30, 40 years, and of course, some others will be new to the group and they'll be like, yeah, I couldn't even stay sober for a week. That's okay. That's okay. Everyone's on their journey. And if sobriety is something that's tough for you, but it's still something you want to accomplish, that's okay. Figure out the strategies that you need to help yourself out. And if you're finding that maybe sobriety is not the thing that you want, that's okay too. Work on a moderation goal. Whatever that particular goal is, that could be something that works better for you and maybe is something that you can transition to sobriety from a moderation goal. So to make that a little bit more concrete, if I'm drinking, say, 7 drinks a night and I want to get to sobriety, well, maybe it's too much to go from 7 to nothing, but maybe it's better to go from 7 to 4. So I'm still going to allow myself to drink. I'm only going to have a max of 4, and then I'm done for the night. And then maybe once that's kind of a habit, maybe it goes down to 2, et cetera, et cetera. You kind of wean your way down to 0 if that is the goal that you want. The point is this, as I start to wind this conversation down, that while substance use can start innocently and is maintained by complex factors and impacts are profound, substance use is treatable. And there is a way for people to get better. So I encourage you, do a quick Google search. We do quick Google searches all the time for all sorts of things. Find somebody by you, if you are someone struggling with substance use, find someone by you who can help you out. Even if you want to try out an AA meeting, go for it. I mean, that's free. Call the SAMHSA hotline. That number, is very easy to find online. If you want to work through some deeper issues that might be leading to that substance use, like depression, anxiety, relationship troubles, trauma, you might want to consider reaching out to someone like myself to help you with individual therapy. But whatever you need to do to help you out, please don't wait any longer. And if you think that this episode could benefit somebody else who might be struggling with substance use, please pass it along to them, because at the end of the day, there is hope out there. And I hope that this almost hour-long discussion of substance use has shown that. You don't have to be suffering in silence. People don't have to be addicted to drugs or alcohol for the rest of their lives. They can change if they want. Recovery stories remind us that change is always within reach. So I hope that this particular podcast episode was helpful to you, or maybe it'll be helpful to somebody else in your life. If you found some value in it, again, please leave a 5-star rating and review wherever you are listening to this. It helps the show grow quite a bit. Again, I am Dr. Gregory T. Obert, clinical psychologist. If you want to learn more about me, check out my website, royaloasispi.com. I also do a bunch of other things as well. You can check out my dark psychology series. You can check out my gaming series that I do with my wife. All the links are in the description below. If you want to read something that I wrote a book a number of years back. Check it out on Amazon. You can also listen to me act it out on Audible. So check out all my links, see if there's something there that appeals to you, and I appreciate you taking the time. Thank you all so much for listening, and until next time, be safe, be well, be powerful.